75 part 2 with the one. No, 76. Okay, we'll do that again. Well, welcome, Hilary. This is Basis 76 part 2, and we're going to concentrate now on some of the details of the subject matter that you deal with. So, well, take it away.
Okay. So within the context of the time limit of one segment, I thought we could first look at what woke me up and why I'm on a ufologist channel, and then look at the process that led me into my passion, which was the foods and herbs for breastfeeding mothers and the injuries of the new mother. And if we have time after that, possibly going into some of the research I've done for some of the books that I'm planning to write now.
Excellent.
Okay.
But we can do those at another time. Don't shirk on the details. You said, don't shirk on the details, Miles. So this is your opportunity to really get in there. Okay.
Okay. So it's quite possible that mothers will be looking for me online. They'll be thinking, oh, should I buy Hilary's book or not, Mother Food, or some of the other books that I will be producing, and they'll look me up and they'll find me on your channel. And they'll say, what? She's on a channel that deals with UFOs and aliens? What kind of a kook is that? So I wanted to talk about my process of waking up and why I'm actually here. So I would say that it was a series of health injuries that woke me up. The first one was actually my experience with my first baby when he was born, and he had colic. And I went to the doctor. My baby's crying all the time. What's the matter? And he had no answer for that. In fact, he gave me a barbiturate, which was very harmful to my baby. The barbiturate, sedated him, and that was his answer for my baby's colic. At the same time, I was experiencing low milk supply, and he also had no answer for that. And in fact, both he and my breastfeeding experts, they told me that I couldn't possibly be experiencing low milk supply, that it practically didn't exist, that since I was nursing all the time from morning to night, I must have enough milk, and my baby was gaining slowly. So what I discovered was that I didn't recognize it quite at the time, but afterwards, in hindsight, I recognized that there are issues in early motherhood around the experiences of mothers and babies that were completely out of the range, the view of our medical industries. And that was quite shocking to me when you consider all the money and all the time and all the research they've put into so many things. And the fact that they were offering me all these tests during pregnancy, and I was going once a month, to make sure I was having a healthy pregnancy. And then you have your baby, and basically you're on your own. So that was a shocker. And that sounds insignificant compared to a lot of the medical, problems that people are encountering today. But yet, from the point of view of a woman who's just had a baby, it's like these are such precious days, and you want it to be just right, and you're setting the foundation for the health of your baby, for the rest of your baby's life, and you're going into that beautiful bonding process, and then you're dealing with problems that no one has an answer for, a hungry baby, a screaming baby. So the next wake up was around immunizations. I changed doctors at that time because I didn't like the fact that my doctor had given my baby barbiturates so easily. And I was recommended that I go to a doctor who treated children holistically. And she had been actually the director of the pediatrics department in the Basel, Switzerland hospital many years. And she completely surprised me by recommending that I don't give my children the MMR. And other mothers were also coming forward to me and saying, are you going to vaccinate your child? Have you thought about it? Have you read about it? Do you know about the MMR? Because a lot of children were having bad side effects from the MMR, which is the combined vaccination of measles, mumps, rubella, which today has been brought into association.
I have to butt in there. That's been very, very controversial. There's been people go to jail about this. So on what basis are you confirming that?
I'm not confirming anything. I'm telling you what happened. What happened was that in 1985 in Switzerland, people, mothers, and also pediatricians were recognizing the fact that the MMR was causing negative side effects in children, and they were warning against it. And so my pediatrician actually told me, she recommended that I get the single shots and that I get them later. So she wasn't against the immunization, but she thought they were seeing so many complications with the combined shot. So that was you have to understand, that was in 1985. And Andrew Wakefield's famous study that put it on the map was in 1998. So that's 14 years later that parents and some pediatricians were already recognizing this conundrum. So I'm trying to tell you things that woke me up. I didn't give my children the MMR. I took my pediatrician's advice. And there I was 14 years later, I had dealt with children with different cognitive problems, and thank God I didn't give them the MMR, because they were they would have been vulnerable for these kinds of reactions. I had already been dealing with children with different cognitive issues, and then Andrew Wakefield did his study, and it was like, yeah, no, I understand. That was what they were talking about when my babies were little. But anyway, you see, there's a sense of history there that most people don't know. Most people think the MMR controversy started with Wakefield. And he will tell you, and he does in his interviews, that, well, no. Parents came to him saying that they had noticed this connection between the vaccine and their children's decline, and he thought it was worth pursuing. And I can, from my limited experience, verify his story that parents were already talking about that more than a decade before he actually became involved. So I'm just telling stories. I'm not like talking about controversies and going into it in depth. I'm just telling this was my process. Another thing that was going on was my first child had ADHD. And he had it quite severely. He was the only child actually who got vaccinated at 3 weeks old, and then he developed a horrible colic after that. And you can go online and look at vaccinations and colic, and you'll find a lot of parents talking about how after they got their children immunized at their, one of their early appointments, that the colic just went out the roof. So anyway, he had a horrible ADHD, and he really suffered under it because he would fall off of chairs and walk into door frames, and he'd fall down, he'd stumble and fall just walking from one room to the next, and he couldn't hold eye contact, and he was miserable. He was just miserable. And at 4 years old, he had a rather serious accident, and that jolted me. And I began talking to people, and a friend of mine had come back from a visit to India with an extreme digestive problem. He had lost 40 pounds and he was wasting away. And he went to a doctor who did, at that time, a controversial blood test for allergies. And the results had turned his health around. So I took my child to the same doctor, got the same test done, got a list of foods to avoid. And within 1 week, my boy stopped falling off of chairs. He no longer stumbled and fell. He held eye contact. He was so much calmer. And, I was shocked. I was so amazed. And he began to hold to this diet very strictly on his own, without my telling him all the time, don't eat that, because he recognized that whenever he had certain things that he felt worse. And I went to a doctor at that time who was the specialist for ADHD in Switzerland, which at that time was actually called POS. I don't remember what that stood for in German. And I told her about it.
This was not in the United States or the so-called Western medicine zone.
Switzerland is Western medicine zone.
Well, it's Western, but it's, from what I understand, these kind of tolerances and dogmas aren't sort of necessarily adhered to as strongly in Europe as they are in Britain and the United States. There's a wider openness in terms of other attitudes to medicine. That's what I'm trying to say.
Jein, which in German means yes and no.
Okay.
Jein.
Oh, in German you have you have a no. You have a word for yes and no. Bloody hell! Good, good.
I guess in English it would be ness or yo.
No, we just have we just obfuscate mealy mouth around the point, never actually tell you anything which means anything. That's how we do it.
Right. Well, I frankly feel that in the United States that there's a tendency to overstate the weight and the presence of alternative medicine in Europe. I think it's convenient to do it that way because it fits into what we would like to believe. But actually, there are a lot of doctors in Europe. I would say most of them. I would say it's kind of interesting too. Now we're going into history again. After World War II, the United States became dominant, and doctors all over the Western world began to follow actually the recommendations of the CDC. And you can run into doctors in Switzerland who are just as narrowly aware of alternatives as you do in the United States. I would say that the pressure here is more because the CDC is watching everything they do and they have to provide records and justifications for everything, all the protocols. Like if a doctor gives you any medication, they have to justify it in their records, which is, I don't know, perhaps it's the same way now in Europe, but it used to be a little bit more lax in that respect. But so, yeah, if you wanted to have prestige, you had to publish in the international medical journals, which meant you had to kind of feed into that narrative. So I want to get back to what I was talking about just a second, if I can find it. ADHD, my son, yes. So I went to my doctor and I said, look at him. He's no longer falling off of chairs. You know, he's concentrated, he's happy. And all I did was I had this allergy test done and I followed the instructions and now look at him. And she told me that it wasn't the food, that we knew that wasn't true, that children did not react to food, that what it was that it was psychological. And the fact that I had given my son this extra attention via the diet promoted in him a feeling of having more concern, more motherly attention. And so, you know, it was like via the diet, he was sort of like psychologically feeling more held. And I was really insulted by that. It's like mothers' observations of their children are just discounted. They're just not interested. And I began to look out into the world and I found that parents in England since the 70s had been noting the connection between conservatives, preservatives, food colorings in the food and their children's ADHD. And in England, there had been a big movement. I don't remember the name of the group, but they had actually written the government and, you know, multiple times saying, you know, you have to do studies on this. These foods are affecting our children. And just they realize that the government is on the side of the food industry and not on the side of the parents or the children. And so, you know, all of these things that were happening, they were always pointing to the same thing, and that is that there's this disconnect between the medical industry and the actual experience of people and what was working for them and what was harming them, and that the medical industry was tied up into the pharma industry and tied up into the food industry, and that was kind of a bulwark of power against which, you know, you couldn't really fight as you might expect to be able to. You might expect to be able to go to your doctor and say, look, this helped. So
yeah, but I mean,
anyway.
the thing is, mothers are having their kids taken off them if they don't do these things.
That's right. That's new. It's not that new. It's not that new, but
yeah, okay.
So, just my personal experience again, because I want mothers who are looking at your channel who are saying, why is Hilary on this channel? I want them to understand, and perhaps some of them don't know these things, so I'm taking it a little bit slow.
Well, this channel is about human experience and the forced transhumanization of human beings to robots and the destruction of the natural mother. That's what this is
That's right.
also about.
That's right. That's right. So then I got Lyme disease. And with Lyme disease, it was the same thing, but in a multitude, of course, because nothing that the doctors were offering helped. And in fact, they were harming us. And
Just about in again, Kathy Morgan has done work on that, and I believe it's been recently announced that Lyme disease is a man-made disease.
Well, that's exactly what you find out. If you've been in the Lyme disease community for any amount of time, then you learn that the early concentrations of Lyme disease, like in Connecticut and also in southern Germany and also in Russia, the first places that they really blossomed was all around military labs. So that certain bacteria were being taken and they were being combined with other bacteria or viruses, and they were made into a stealth weapon that very slowly lames and paralyzes a population. And I would like to hope that they didn't intend it to get out into the population, that they were just very naive and stupid. They didn't realize that even though they were doing these studies on an island and it was, isolated by water, that birds did fly between the island and the mainland, and birds carried the ticks that carried the bacteria. So that's right. So exactly. So when you get into these things, the more you get into them, the more that you see deeper and deeper. You have to go into that rabbit hole, because if you want to get well, you have to understand really where the darkness, where the disease is coming from. And the wonderful thing is that people actually, especially through Lyme disease, have developed all kinds of almost miraculous, deep protocols to help themselves heal. In other words, that the human response has just been unbelievable in terms of herbal protocols and magical, medical energy medicine. And I myself am now very, very well, but I've gone up and down over the years. Now, there's an advantage to going down that I wanted to mention. And the advantage to going down and being in bed and being too tired to get up and basically being cut off from your normal life is that then you have time to go down rabbit holes and to watch the hours and hours and hours of films and videos that people like yourself have produced that are so educational. And most people don't have the time to do that. So anyway, that was the positive side of that. I've kind of come to the end of, as far as I know, the things that woke me up. Of course. And then in 2007, at the end of 2006, one of my children, he was 18 at the time, confronted me and said, "Mom, I've been on the internet, and do you know about," and he started the list, "do you know about the Georgia Guidestones? Do you know about Bilderberg? Do you know?" And he started down the list, and then do you know about UFOs? And do you know about, the transhuman protocol? And I was like, whoa, wait a second. This is like, something is like taking my son the wrong way. And I've got to go there now and figure it out so I can pull him back. So I started to do the research and I thought, well, this won't take long. I'm a smart woman, and I'll figure out what's going on, and I'll be able to convince him that he's wrong. And then very quickly I realized that he was opening me to a whole area of knowledge that I had previously been unaware of. And at the same time, in 2006 is when Carrie Cassidy started her program, Project Camelot, and so I started watching that. And then 2007, of course, was the Disclosure Project. Now, when I talk to my friends about what I'm doing, I said, I'm doing this interview series with the ufologists. They said, what, UFOs? That's a little bit too far out there. So I said, well, actually, it's not. Because if you look at the Disclosure Project and you see one military person after another stand up there before the camera on the pedestal and talk about how they had seen or touched or been exposed in different ways to UFOs or to aliens and in different contexts. And it just goes on for hours and hours. And these are smart people with PhDs, people with military backgrounds, pilots, people that we respect. And so actually that's much easier. It's ufology is actually much easier to understand than, let's say, something like Lyme disease or autism or cancer. Those things are much more convoluted, but UFOs, in a way, it's much more upfront.
Well, I'll have to mention to Steve Bassett from the Disclosure Project of your reaction to his work. I think it's very encouraging what you've just said there. It matters. It makes a difference.
Absolutely. And I'm always shocked that people haven't watched it. I think, anyway, my son opened my eyes to these things. And since then, I've been actually glued to all the projects and just fascinated and horrified at times. And
can I ask, what made your son initially even go down that route? Did you get that answer from him?
I think he was just an 18-year-old exploring the internet. And I think actually that a lot of kids go down this route and they learn about Bilderberg and Bohemian Grove, and they're opening up knowledge of, or they go to Alex Jones or David Icke, and they get kind of, I call it the internet education or the YouTube education. And in fact, somebody recently said that, I don't remember, it was an article in one of even the mainstream press, that our young men are getting their education through YouTube bloggers today. And a lot of them are very awake and very, very aware. So, and he told me more. He said, it was 2006, he said, "Mom, don't you want to travel the world?" And I said, "What?" And he said, "Yeah, travel the world while you still can, because in 2008, they're going to collapse the economy. And there's going to be wars all over the world. And you won't be able to travel anymore. The world's going to change. That's what's planned." And I went, "What?" And then when it started to happen, of course, I was devastated. Yeah.
It is getting bad. Kerry Cassidy was held at Heathrow Airport for 3 hours.
Wow.
Because she's come to England too many times. And I think doing it the same thing in the United States, they're making it difficult to travel. I'll have to say. But we'll say, we'll wish good things happen.
So this will all have been old news for your public, obviously. And I'm not even going into some of the deeper stuff. I'm leaving it there.
No, don't worry. It's important you're experiencing this, and your actual how it means like to your life, and your reaction to that is very important.
Thank you. It was challenging at that time to have those experiences because, it breaks you down. It breaks your paradigm on so many levels, your sense of safety, even on a spiritual level, your sense of safety. If you think, well, there could be beings that are, multidimensional, that are affecting you. And the whole thing about targeted individuals, I also want to mention that, because there was an article just this last 2 weeks, it's been pretty much in the news, I'm sure that most people haven't noticed it, that diplomats down in Cuba are saying that they've been targeted by sonic weapons. In other words, they don't know how it happens, they don't hear it necessarily, but they actually have brain damage.
Yeah, they're losing their hearing, yeah.
And they can't think, that they have brain damage. And so we know now through these articles that exists, but there's this whole group of targeted individuals who say that they are being targeted. They are being used as the government as guinea pigs, and they are actually being targeted by sound or by some sort of energy forces, and they are going to their doctors with burn marks. They say they're driving to work in their cars and their body will start to burn, and their skin will actually, get red, and it's painful, and they'll get nerve damage. And I remember seeing, but I didn't look for the link, but I think it would be very important to include it. that they also went in front of Congress, or, the pre-stage to going in front of Congress. The doctors went with their patients. So it wasn't just, crazy people saying we're experiencing this. It was doctors who were documenting it. All of these things, people are not aware of what's going on. So, okay, so that's enough to that, I think. So now I'd like to talk about my work with mother food, and the reason that one of the...
Actually, I think we would, just for a second, just while we're changing tack here,
yes,
you've got a very, very important other person in the room with you.
That's right.
Can we say hello?
Well, let's try. Hi, Cynthia. Come on. She doesn't like that I'm wearing headphones. I have to take the headphones off.
Okay.
No, it's okay. I'll just sort of keep it. Hi, Cynthia. Come on. Oh, such a sweet bird. Oh, sweet. Yeah, I like to go. Yeah, I like to go. Yeah, I'll just pull her up closer. She's a little put off by headphones.
Oh, maybe
Next time I'll try to find my earphones.
Yeah.
And she doesn't mind if I have an earphone in, then she'll come on my shoulder.
Oh, right. Well, I just thought we didn't want to make her feel unwanted and unloved.
Yes, she's very loved.
Yeah.
That's a bird. She's a bird.
Oh, isn't that clever?
Yeah. She's flighted, She goes where she will.
Wonderful. Well, there. That's the important person in this discussion mentioned. We can now continue.
Important.
Yes. Yeah. Okay.
So last time that I spoke, I mentioned kind of like psychical abilities, or having always been aware of the spiritual world from being very young, and meeting important teachers early in life who opened me up. And one of the things that I knew was that I was always concerned with, like, what's my purpose in life? And the funny thing is that everybody is. Everybody wants their life to have a purpose, and having a purposeful life, having concrete goals, knowing that you can contribute somehow to the world is part of being an intact, healthy person. So when I discovered with my own experience of low milk supply that I was living in Switzerland, and there was this whole wealth of information there about the foods and herbs that if you took them, you could build your milk supply. Your body responded to these foods and herbs, and you could go from being low supply to middle supply or high supply, which was in my case, that was the case for me. And I went to my doctors, and I went to my lactation consultants, and I went to the La Leche League, and I talked to them about it. And what I found out was that some of them were saying, oh, this doesn't work, and it's not important, even if it did. Mothers don't need it, because that represents, like, the idea that people were holding was that human beings are separate from nature. So the breasts and the body should be able to function without, like, the support of nature. It doesn't matter that we evolved for millions of years with nature and that women have always used these things. That's irrelevant in our concept today. We believe that that's all not important, that mothers should be able to breastfeed without any support. The body works. Now, others said, oh, yeah, of course, we have a family farm, and when a cow starts losing her milk, we go out in the garden and we get some fennel, we pull it up from the ground, we just throw the whole bushel of fennel in with the cow feed, and the milk comes back immediately. So, excuse me, but that's a galactagogue. Fennel is a galactagogue. Galactagogue, by the way, is the pharmaceutical word for a food or an herb or anything else that induces a flow of milk. So as you see, even as I'm talking about milk and breastfeeding and flow, I'm sure that there are many of your listeners who are getting kind of squeamish, because we don't really talk about breasts and milk and all those bodily fluids very easily.
Well,
and
go
I
ahead.
understand that. Right. So I realized that this was really important. My first baby, I had no supply. My second baby, I was struggling. And then towards the end of the breastfeeding period, after 8 weeks, I stumbled on a beverage in Switzerland that's spiced with natural herbs from the Swiss Alps, and I drank it. And I had this flood of milk. I thought, what? It's the drink is called Rivella. And I was experimenting with Rivella, and I was like, whoa, I have all this milk all of a sudden. My neighbor was a pediatric nurse. She was coming home one day. How you doing? I said, I was struggling with low milk supply, as you know, and now I've been drinking Rivella, and I have more than enough milk. And she said, oh, everyone knows about that. All the mothers use Rivella. It's even served in the maternity wards. And I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me about it? Why didn't my doctor tell me about it? Why didn't my lactation consultants tell me about it? Why only after I discovered this myself will you affirm that this is actually used? So again, that was an opening for me. I had a doctor who was a very nice doctor, I have to say. I got him after my fourth baby was born, and I was in his office, and I was nursing my chubby 6-month-old daughter. And I turned to him and said, I was already researching the foods and herbs, and I turned to him and I said, so do you ever have any clients? And I don't like to call us patients. Do you ever have any clients who come to you complaining of low milk supply? And he said, oh, yeah, all the time. So what do you say? And he said, well, they don't really have low milk supply. That's so rare. It just doesn't really exist. But they just want an excuse for stopping breastfeeding. They don't really want to breastfeed. So they come to me and that they hope that I'll say that, it's okay, that they don't need to breastfeed. It's normal. And some women don't have low milk supply. And he was going on like this. And I turned to him and I said, well, that's odd. I wouldn't be able to breastfeed if I wasn't using things like Rivella. And his eyes fell to the floor and his face fell and he couldn't look at me anymore. And he said, my wife nursed all 3 of our children with Rivella. And I said, so do you ever tell the women who come to you that they should try Rivella? And he said, no. And the reason he doesn't is because it's not evidence-based. There's no directive from the CDC, and this is in Switzerland, but still there's no directive from above saying we've tried this, we approve this for recommendation. So again, I realized that either you're in the know, you've heard it from other mothers, or you're lost. Because there's this wall between the people who know it and the mothers who don't, and they don't have that information. And I just thought that's not fair. So I began to research it, and I began to go to the libraries, and I went to the Swiss University Library, and they had a medical library, an anthropological library, and I was taking home cartons of books, and I was also just about to go onto the internet and was connecting up with researchers and different people around the world who were interested in lactation. And it was just fascinating to me that around the world, different people had all these traditions of different herbs and foods that were typical for their area. So they knew what grows in their area supports women's chemistry for lactation, is what I call it. We sort of can move the body towards supporting that chemistry of the production of prolactin and oxytocin. And so I started putting this all together, taking notes and everything, and I thought, well, what about in ancient times? So I got a book of herbs that came from the doctor Dioscorides. He wrote this book at 50 in the Common Era, 50 AD, as they say, and he was a very famous military doctor who traveled around the Mediterranean with the army, and he collected information from all around the Mediterranean. And one of the things he collected was information about the herbs and the foods that were being used by mothers for different breastfeeding issues. I thought that was so fascinating because he was talking about herbs that promote breast milk, herbs that suppress breast milk, herbs that bring back breast milk after it's been suppressed, herbs that can be used for mastitis, for breast infection or engorgement. So there was this whole system, in fact, that people knew about in Western culture. You have to wonder, because that was the West, right? The Mediterranean, that was the roots of Western culture. That was, it was part of our lives back in ancient times. So what happened? Well, what happened, we know, is that the Christian church came along and they took all the herbalism into the monastery, and it was forbidden that the women and the midwives use the herbs more and more over hundreds of years. These laws came into effect. So how much time do we have?
I think we are doing fine, but this is an exact indication of the exact purpose of these so-called churches. They are here to destroy us. I mean, they're attacking.
Yes, well,
attacking the woman, attacking human fertility, everything.
Yes, and that happened over hundreds of years. And I in Switzerland, I don't have it in my own library. I have a wonderful book that describes this from century to century to century, how the church took more and more of women's medicine into their own fold and forbade it to the midwives. And one of the reasons was because they were afraid that women would abort the children, or that women would have a child and give it away, or they would take a child of somebody else's. So it was the right of the father was being protected, really. So what they did was they forbade in the end, they forbade the use of any herb by a midwife, even for like pain in childbirth, all those things.
I mean, I think they equated it with witchcraft, didn't they? Or the use of these herbs, or the wise women who dealt with it were labeled as witches.
Well, the midwives were also the doctors of the villages. So in effect, by calling them witches, they were saying that they were demonizing the folk medicine.
Literally,
But it wasn't only the midwives who were being targeted. Also, it's really fascinating when you start looking into how women were being targeted. It wasn't only the midwives; it's professional women who chose not to marry, women who chose not to have children. Anybody who wasn't just following the line would be persecuted. And not only women, too, of course. Men and different sects were persecuted. Anybody who wasn't in the Catholic fold. I mean, it was a horrible time. Let's just say it.
Well, I think
it was a horrible time.
I mean, that's the so-called St. Patrick was there to demonize and bash the Irish into the rule of Rome. Nothing to do with Christianity, but the rule of those creatures in Rome. And I say creatures advisedly.
Mm-hmm. So, at the turn of the 20th century, the first schools of midwifery were coming into being, actually in the middle of the 1800s, but say at the end of the 1800s, the beginning of the 20th century. And one of the you had to sign a contract if you went into these schools, and you had to sign off that you would never use an herb.
Wow.
Yeah. This was in Europe. I don't know how it was in the States. And so it was like being forced into, forgottenness. I'm trying to think of the word in English, only the word in German is coming up for me, because I lived there for so long. I spoke German for so long. It was my primary language, Vergessenheit. Anyway, for me, this was fascinating. It's like what our basic knowledge was forced into obliteration, and now we don't have it. And if we try to have it, like, we're unscientific, we're anti-science, because women's bodies should just work and the milk supply is rare. So I was getting into the hidden history, as you would call it, and so that's kind of where our two worlds fully overlap. And I'll tell you some more about that as we go along.
Well, we are essentially emerging from a very dark age. I mean, we're trying to force this dark age back on us, but we're in a lot of trouble.
Yes, we are. We're in so much trouble. So what I found
and that's why you speaking on the basis is exactly on message.
Yes, it's not only from that point of view, but what I have to say doesn't belong anywhere else, because I cannot talk about this to feminists. I cannot talk about this to... I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine yesterday. I say, where else? Who else would be interested in this? Who else would allow me to express this information this way? A lot of people in the women's health industry, they don't want to know about it because it could frighten mothers. You see, they want to do everything to protect mothers from feeling frightened, which I fully understand, and so forth and so on. But It's the truth that sets us free. It's not being placated.
Well, to be
So,
perfectly blunt, we're going to have to be scared to hell. Batshit crazy is a phrase. Otherwise, we're not going to be around much longer.
yeah, we have to face things. We have to face things fully, and it takes a lot of strength to do that. And not everyone has that strength or the training, and so it's a whole. Oh, that's something else. I'll just try to stay on track.
Stay on message.
Yeah, I'll try to stay on it. So at this point, I was living in a house with a garden. I was reading Dioscorides from this herbalist from the Greek world. And I had moved into this beautiful old house. It was 100 years old, had a big garden, and the neighbor was actually taking care of the garden. The previous owners hadn't wanted to, and it had a big vegetable garden. It was a lot of weeds, and I love that. And so he was from Sardinia, which is an island off of Italy, very old culture. He was in his 50s, and I said to him one day, Graziano, can you tell me which foods and herbs in your culture are used to promote milk supply? Now, when you ask somebody a question like that, you think they're going to look at you with their eyes crossed, like, what? Never heard of it. But just the opposite happened. He said, oh, yeah, follow me. And he took me through my garden, and he showed me all the plants in my garden. Hollyhock, sow's thistle, it's a weed. Nettle, of course. He said parsley, a little bit, not too much. Too much will scare the milk away, but just a little bit supports it. And so we went through, and I went up, and I was, going through my book of Dioscorides. At that point, everything was a book, right? And I found all the things that he had described there: hollyhock, sow's thistle, nettle, etc. And I was shocked. It was a real eye opener. Okay, so he still knows it. So somehow these traditions are so rooted in our being, in our culture, that some people still are carrying this information. And I began to look at that point also into mythology, because I thought, okay, so if galactagogues, again, the pharmaceutical word for these foods and herbs, if galactagogues are so important to the start of motherhood, surely they would be somehow, you'd find them in ancient mythology in some form. And I began to look at goddesses around the world and into different forms of mythology, and everywhere I looked, there they were. It was shocking. It was shocking. And and you had these examples. I'll just give one of them that is kind of the best because it really encapsulates it. In the ancient Mayan mythology, there is the Earth Mother. The Earth Mother was taken down and thrown down to Earth, and she was killed by her sons, and her body was strewn everywhere. She was massacred, which in mythology talk is saying the old, let's say matriarchal or matricentric culture was overthrown by the new patriarchal or military-based culture. That's like you can read mythology kind of like a newspaper of its time. The major events were encapsulated in these stories. So she was thrown down, but at the same time, the image that you had of the mother goddess was one where her breasts were overflowing with something called pulque, which is a fermented drink of the mangue cactus, which breastfeeding women use to promote their milk supply. So here you have the old mother goddess producing pulque, which is a galactagogue, as her own milk, and it kind of looks milky. It's a milky white beverage, and it would be caught in they were like sacred little pots, and pulque is actually used in the cultic systems of the Mayans. And so, it was reserved for the soldiers and the kings. It was reserved for those, who were having mystical experiences. So it would also be spiced with different, hallucinogenic herbs, and then used in the cultic experience. So it was the milk of the mother that was being used for the visions of the afterlife, as it were, the visions of eternity. Now, you have a new image, a new younger goddess who came in, and she was the goddess of the mangue cactus, and her name was Mayahuel, and she sits in the cactus and she's breastfeeding a baby while sitting in the cactus. So she's a breastfeeding goddess, but she's actually called the goddess, the breastfeeding goddess of the soldiers. And it says she can breastfeed, she can strengthen, she can fortify all the soldiers. So again, it's the old matriarchal symbol that's being utilized to the benefit of the new system. Now her breast milk is going to the soldiers. Her magical breast milk, obviously, which is, of course, okay. So this is complicated, I know, to hear the first time, but essentially it's like you have a galactagogue. Even today, Polk is used as a galactagogue by native Latinos. And so you have this galactagogue figuring in old mythology as the milk of the goddess and as a cultic drink. And I found this several places in the same kind of absolute structure in other cultures. So it seems as though there was an older earth-based system that was taken over, and the galactagogue properties of these things were forgotten, and it was spiced with hallucinogenic herbs. And I personally believe, we had this talk recently, I mean, the last time I mentioned like ayahuasca or these strong these strong transformative herbs, and you said they don't promote they can cloud the visions. They're not clear vision. They're not real visions.
Well, it's only from the point of view of if you want to do actual sort of remote viewing or be out of body and see clearly with the mind's eye. Right. If you can do that naturally rather than inducing it with some of those concoctions for that purpose.
Right.
That's only.
So you've perhaps Terence McKenna died a few years ago, but he was he was an ethnobotanist, and he researched the possible effect of psilocybin on the evolution of early peoples. And he said if you were to be one of those mammals who use psilocybin as a food, now not as a hallucinogen, it was just one of those things that you occasionally ate, it would increase your visual acuity and give you an evolutionary advantage. So the idea being that eating small amounts of these things, and they are found, of course, different kinds all over the world, would actually have contributed to the evolution of the human brain, which is fascinating. And I believe that one of the things that happened in early culture, this is my belief, this is just kind of fits into everything that I know, and it's not that I've been told this, or it's just it's logical, is that as soon as you started to have priest castes, and you had that already in really early shamanistic cultures, those priests became the people who knew how to use the hallucinogens, and they were no longer accessible to the normal people. So you already had in those earlier cultures, you were taking something away from the people and you were giving it to the priest caste.
Absolutely. So it's a common link here that the priest of whatever, and we have the high priest of scientism. Some people call science today and scientism a dogma, a religion.
Absolutely.
And the scientists are the high priests of the knowledge that you can't possibly have.
You can't possibly have it. It's written in a different language. You can't understand it. Even the scientists themselves, they don't understand what the other ones know. So like no one's connecting the dots. It's all, everybody's carrying their piece, and it becomes very dissociated from human experience.
I mean, they're even programmed, even scientists who have even published papers, if they say it without the right caveat, they're almost thrown out as heretics, even though they're scientists, it's peer reviewed. But if they haven't heard it and it's come through the right source, and so on. And
this happened with the ADHD question as well. There were people who were in the 70s, the 80s. Feingold was one doctor, and she wrote, another doctor, very important, she wrote, "Is This My Child?" They conducted experiments and with controls and everything, and their science was rejected because it doesn't fit the narrative. It doesn't fit the narrative. Food is not supposed to affect us. GMOs are fine. We can alter everything because human beings are not animals. We do not respond to our environment the same way animals do. So let's say animals have different reactions to these things. We don't. We have this very abstract, strange view of what is to be human. And that, of course, disempowers us from really seeing how we are connected and how important that connection actually is.
Well, we're now getting epigenetics being accepted.
That's right. Epigenetics is accepted. That's true.
And that's a big
absolutely.
step. That's a huge step
absolutely.
forward.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And that is affected by the foods and things and what happens. Yeah. Okay.
Right. So as I worked online with low milk supply mothers, I had a series of coincidences in Switzerland, and one of them was, I told you I had gone to all kinds of lactation consultants and La Leche League leaders, and I told them of my interest. And that none of them told me about Christiana Husi Simonis, who was a La Leche League leader, who was actually the president of the La Leche League in Zurich for a few years. And she left because they would not allow her to use herbs. And she said, you can tell a mother that she has to breastfeed nonstop in bed with her baby over a weekend to build her supply. Or you can say, go out in the garden, pull up some dandelions, drink some nettle tea, and immediately the supply responds and they're good. At that time, the Leche League leaders were not allowed to talk about herbs. They could lose their licensure. And this is actually a problem even today, in that like a doula who works with a mother, works with a mother during birth and after birth and the postpartum to support them. If she's not a nutritionist and she's not an herbalist, she's not really allowed to talk about these things. Same thing with a midwife or a lactation consultant. Even professional lactation consultants today, they're not allowed to talk about herbs with their clients because it's out of their so-called scope of practice. So you have actually people who are working with breastfeeding mothers who are legally not allowed to give them certain information. So I published my book as an outsider, and however, I have to complete the story. I was introduced to Christiana Husi Simonis this way. I called up a Chinese herb dispensary and I said, I'm interested in Chinese herbs that support milk supply. Do you have a library? Yes. And then he said to me, 20 minutes ago, I was just talking to another woman who's interested in the same thing, herbs from the East and the West that support lactation, and here's her phone number. So you see, if she hadn't called up on that day and I hadn't called up 20 minutes later, and if he hadn't had the gumption to connect us, my book wouldn't have happened the way that it did. But you see, the other herbalists, the other La Leche League leaders, they knew about her. They knew what she was doing, but they didn't tell me. Why didn't they tell me? Why were they? It's like
struck off.
They were scared. They were obviously scared of two people of the same ilk that was contrary to what they were being taught and allowed to do getting together. So anyway, Christiana was just starting a school of holistic lactation, holistic breastfeeding consulting in Switzerland, and she put it together, and I became a graduate of her first year of her school, which to date is the only school of holistic breastfeeding in the world. And of course, she just widened my perspective, my understanding of so many things, and her too. And all of that went into my book. So it became a very, very rich resource. It couldn't have happened otherwise. And I just want to say that even today, some women are trying so hard to create a certification of holistic breastfeeding, holistic lactation in the United States, and they're not supported. They don't have the finances. But so many IBCLCs realize that they are lacking this crucial information to be able to help mothers who are going through today's epigenetic problems. So let's hold on to that word because it's very important. It's really playing a role in the new problems that breastfeeding mothers are having with the epigenetics of prior generations now leading to so many new problems that they don't have answers for. So let's just take a little break. Maybe you'll darken the screen. I don't know, but I just
Yeah,
need to sort of gather my
we'll
breath or something.
we'll have a little break. We've hit the almost hit the first hour on this, so I think it's a good point to have a little bit of a break. But this is extremely important. It shows a fear-based terror that medicine and motherhood is going through in this modern era.
Yes, that's right.
Okay.
And okay. I mean, I can go on, but
Yeah, let's.
it seems so intense. It seems so intense, and I have to sort of, get myself a little aligned here. I could breathe. I could breathe.
Well, we are recording, so this is exciting. There.
Yeah, she's a good bird.
Beautiful. Better not say the Monty Python joke. Beautiful plumage. Yeah.
Yeah, good bird. Yeah, good bird. Oh, she doesn't want to stay. Maybe she'll come back later.
Yeah. But she's got... what kind of parrot is she? He is she?
She's an Amazonian. She's from Amazon. She's from the jungles of Mexico. I mean, not she personally, but her kind.
Yeah. She's got red tips on some of her feathers.
Yeah, on her wings, front of her wings. Yeah, very pretty.
Yes. Well, there
we don't. We've only had her a few years. She's 15 years old. Got her about 3 years ago. So she, and I never thought I'd have a bird, but my partner really wanted a bird, and she wasn't flighted, and she wasn't comfortable on anyone's shoulder, and she's very subdued, and she's really come out and is a lot of fun.
What does flighted mean?
It means that her wings, the feathers were cropped so that she couldn't fly. So we let the feathers grow out, and then she learned how to fly. And, we were able to sort of watch each step of her gaining courage to explore her environment, to fly up and down stairs, to fly onto shoulders. And people were afraid. I mean, her former owners told us you don't let birds go above your shoulders because otherwise they become dominant. They become domineering. They'll bite you. And she's so sweet. She's so happy to not have those limitations anymore. She never bites. She's never domineering. She's just a dear one.
Oh, very nice. Very nice.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to recall the other colleague of mine, a filmmaker and everything, from, I think, Philadelphia or New York. She has a parrot, a big bird, quite a big luscious one on her shoulder, and made a whole movie about it. I think I mentioned that the first time.
Right.
Well, we've had a little bit of a break. So let's continue.
Before we go on,
yeah, it's getting pretty serious.
I wanted to say that most people don't know this, but the field of lactation is fraught with conflict. The people who are actually working in it are going through so many hard conflicts of how they're understanding and how they're moving forward with dealing with the new epigenetic problems that have evolved. Most people don't know that. You have, for instance, in dentistry, everyone knows, well, some people believe in amalgam fillings, they're fine, they're not, and other people are like, no, mercury is really dangerous, you don't put it in people's mouths. Or root canals or various other things, or we know about the conflicts around autism, and we know that there are different, protocols for cancer, and we know that that's, disputed, but not many people realize that there are also disputes going on in the field of lactation. And I think mothers should know that. I think they have a right to know that.
Well, yeah. This is an opportunity to talk about that.
So let me go on. Let me go back to what I was going to talk about, because you had mentioned epigenetics,
yes.
And I have a little bit to say about that.
Good. And that's because of
As
Sarah
far
Goodley.
As hidden history, in about the year 2010, Google Scholar really blossomed online and became a resource. And I began to use it and to discover that there were these books that I could find from the 1800s about lactation, about breastfeeding. And one of them was written by a man called Charles Ruth. He was a famous doctor in England. And he was not only involved in gynecology, but he was involved in the Samaritan orphanage in London. And he and other doctors were observing that a lot of babies who came into the orphanage were dying because they didn't have breast milk. They didn't have any real good alternatives at that time. They didn't have refrigeration. So they actually developed a research study where they showed that those babies who received the most breast milk thrived and became healthy. And then depending on the percentage of breast milk they received, or the percentage of what they called PAP was received, the ones who received only PAP, they died. The ones who received 10% breast milk, they got somehow through. And so this was a groundbreaking study. And at the same time, he became very interested in the causes of low milk supply. The causes, why were so many women saying that they couldn't breastfeed? He wanted to help women breastfeed so that they weren't dependent on wet nurses. So first he proved that breast milk is important, because apparently people didn't know it before that. They thought, well, if a baby lives or a baby dies, that's God's hand, right?
I don't know how the hell we got here at all.
And then he showed that some women have real problems that contribute to low milk supply. He studied it, and the problems he came up with are things that we're only discovering today. So he said women who were very thin and quickly gain weight and become fat, these were the wet nurses who were taken into the homes of the upper class, and they were just stuffed with pastries and they just got really fat. They lost their supply. So he recognized that there was something about over-consuming sugar, over-consuming rich foods. And today we know that diabetes and pre-diabetes and so-called insulin resistance, which develops because we have this carb and sugar-based diet in the West, is contributing to so many women's low milk supply issues. So he mentioned that. Then he said so-called masculine women. Now, I'm a so-called masculine woman, and I'm going to prove it to you right now. I'm going to hold up my hand, and you see that my ring finger is as long or even longer than my first finger. And this is typical of a woman who has exposure to a lot of testosterone in the womb. So, depending on how much testosterone you're exposed to when you're pregnant, your mother's pregnant with you, will determine whether you're a more testosterone dominant woman. Now, women with this hand form, they've found out that these women are more, we were able to park better. We don't have the problems with reverse parking. We're better we're good musicians. We're good leaders, mathematicians. So having a more masculine brain also, however, means that we have a more masculine body. And these women have more problems.
Hold on here. Are you telling me that being able to parallel park or reverse park is actually a genetically, it's a woman's problem? It is an actual woman's problem. You're not getting here. I mean, this is serious. There are people who make YouTube videos about this. It's
not just a bar joke, a pub joke.
Oh, well then continue. We're now talking serious matters here. Okay, continue.
Now, I have to say that your sound had just went really wacky on me. I hope that was just
maybe I over distorted. Are you okay there? Is that better?
Now it's better. Yeah.
Okay.
Fine. Right. So, so I'm a masculine woman, and women with these masculine attributes often develop a hormonal imbalance called polycystic ovarian syndrome. And one of the first things we noticed in the beginning of the 2000s, when more and more women were coming with low milk supply issues, was they were saying that they had polycystic ovarian syndrome. They were being diagnosed with this. So that's a big issue. Polycystic ovarian syndrome produces two issues. For one, we are testosterone dominant, and another one is that we're insulin resistant. Again, that sort of goes with this constitution. So anyway, Dr. Ruth had established both of those things. And then he also said anemia. And wait a second, very young, very old, women who had children first at an old age. So he would say if the organs aren't used, they deteriorate. And we see a lot of older women, who we use fertility processes to have a baby when they're in their mid-30s, early 40s, and they often have breastfeeding problems. So anyway, Dr. Ruth established all this. And he also wrote recommendations. Those recommendations were taken up into books that followed. Every 10 years or so, another book was produced based on his work, and all of his recommendations were included. And these became basically the breastfeeding books of modern times. However, two things were excluded. The information on low milk supply was excluded from the newer books. No one talked about the causes of low milk supply anymore. And Dr. Ruth also researched heavily into the foods and the herbs that were helping mothers produce milk. And he said they were especially useful for the mothers who had these issues. And he included a chapter on the foods and a chapter on the herbs. Now, you probably can't imagine this, but I just want to say it. When I read Dr. Ruth's book and I realized that my research, Mother Food, that I had just published a few years before, was actually in this book that was published in 1860 and just had been ignored and forgotten, I was shocked. I couldn't speak for a few days. I was traumatized in a way. So the story goes on, though, because in the end of the 1800s, beginning of the 20th century, another very, very famous doctor, Gustav von Bunge, became interested in the concept of low milk supply. He said more and more women are coming into doctors all over Europe saying they don't have a good milk supply. And they were sad about it. They were upset. Doctor, help me. And he said, what can this correlate with? And so he sent out surveys to doctors, and they collected these surveys over many years, I would say over a decade's time, and they eventually got up to 2,000 surveys, and they were very detailed. And what they were looking at is correlations between the mother who had low milk supply and factors that were in her family. So they discovered that women with low milk supply had many more cavities than women who didn't have low milk supply. Their teeth, their calcium metabolism was somehow disturbed. But
is that also sugar? I mean, white sugar? No?
Everybody was eating the same foods, and it was, yes, white sugar was becoming more prominent, clearly. But everybody were eating basically the same foods, but some women were having low milk supply, and they were also having more cavities. And he also found out that the women who had low milk supply had a huge prevalence of alcohol disease in the family. They usually had a father or a grandfather who had been, a raging alcoholic. So he correlated it with that. Now, what's interesting about that is that in the year 2010, Julie Manella, who leads a research group that has done prominent research on breastfeeding and really excellent research, she conducted a research to look into the matter of whether women who had an alcoholic in the immediate family had a different experience breastfeeding than others. And she just did this. She was just curious about it. So she brought in mothers who had an alcoholic in the family and those who didn't, and she gave them, something to drink, and they produced milk. And what she found out was that the women who had alcohol in the family, alcoholism, had what she called a blunted prolactin response. That is, that their bodies reacted slower to the sucking, and their pituitary produced less prolactin. So that these women had what she called a blunted prolactin, which means that their chemistry for lactation was reduced. So in effect, she was saying the same thing that Gustav von Bunge had said 100 years before. Alcoholism in the family affects a woman's ability to produce these chemicals of lactation. And I contacted Julie Manella. I said, did you know about this research from 100 years ago? She had no idea. So at the beginning of the 20th century, a lot of people were talking about degeneration. And there was the Western A. Price, the dentist who traveled around the world and did research by taking photo documentation of the same peoples before and after they had been introduced to the Western diet. So you would have a tribe. Some of them lived in one part of the island, the others lived in the other part of the island, and they were eating the white man's food. And the people who ate the white man's food, very quickly, within 1-2 generations, their teeth deteriorated, their body shape changed. And their teeth became crowded and full of cavities. So they were people at the beginning of the 20th century were very interested in this process of degeneration, and they were observing it. And Van Bunge actually said, he said, we have to look at this now because in decades to come, you won't be able to tell, I don't know, the forest for the trees. Is that the right expression? In other words, there's going to be so many new illnesses and so many new health problems that they won't be able to say what was the origin. And he brought the origin back to alcoholism, which, you could say that was the main thing, of course, sugar and everything else, and the industrialization. But alcoholism in the father was usually the father or the grandfather. It was less in the women or less pronounced. Was causative in causing an epigenetic change in the children.
That's also a symptom of the Industrial Revolution, the way that people lived and the kind of food that they ate as well.
That's right.
Not that I'm trying to defend my 5 pints of Guinness every second night.
Excuse me? What?
I think I said 5 pints of Guinness at the end of the night.
Right.
Not every night. Jesus. Guilty as charged. Continue.
Well, there was raging alcoholism in the 1800s. People were falling down in convulsions on the corners of streets. It was the disease of the time. We don't see that today.
I think the gin palaces was a major contribution. Yeah.
Yeah. So there were these trends. Exactly. I mean, if you're thinking in terms of conspiracy theory, you could say that the population was being attacked through alcohol.
Yes, and again, I draw one's attention to Kathy Morgan's work on that and the industrialization and movement of populations into certain states and so forth.
Right, I love her work, and she also did some work on. I saw it. She said that gynecologists were actually aware that, or somebody was actually aware that if you cut the cord, the placental cord early, and you don't let it completely pulse out the blood into the baby, that you reduce the health of the baby. And so they decided to do it.
Yes. Now this is Sarah Goodley has been screaming about this here in the UK, and her colleague who's a midwife who we can't mention the name, but again, explain what that all means. I mean, this is definitely an attack on our existence. This is our survival. Yeah. They're attacking us right at the baby. We can't get any more blatant than that.
Yes, that's right. And it's so. Anyway, that was talking about epigenetics. People were aware 100 years ago that we were changing, and they were trying to document it, and they were screaming out at that time about it. And interestingly, low milk supply was seen as one of the degenerative manifestations. So today, and people were in denial about it. And people always go into, what is that called? The bias for the normalcy bias. Well, there are always so many autistic people. We just didn't diagnose them. Oh, well, women always had these breastfeeding problems. We just didn't diagnose it. Oh, well, things can't change that quickly, but we're changing quickly, and not noticing it and not responding to it is the death of us, truly.
Have you heard of MK Ultra and all that stuff?
Oh, sure. Hey, I watch your channel.
My God. Well, I mean, it's a predator. We're being killed off, made into robots.
Well, and here I wanted to say something that has given me a lot of confidence, coming from the spiritual journey that I mentioned in the last, our first part one, is Rudolf Steiner. Well, he writes about this. Rudolf Steiner?
Yeah.
Okay, so he wrote about this. He lectured on this, about how there is this darkness, this dark force that descends on humanity and attempts to robotize it. And remember, again, he did this 100 years ago, and he said the attempt to robotize humanity has happened twice before, in Egypt and in Greece. Maybe he also mentioned Atlantis. I don't know. One moment, please. Hey, I have to say they were recording, so every sound just comes on. So you want us to just wait a second to read your drink? Just one moment.
Okay, we're it. Okay, I faded to black. I faded to black on that, but okay.
Yeah, thank you.
We're getting hot and we're getting in the hot and bothered section here, so it's very important. This
Right. So, anyway, Rudolf Steiner actually mentioned that. He said that this dark force, which he describes in his terms, descends on humanity and attempts to robotize them for their own purposes, and that this has happened before twice, and it will happen again. And he says it never works. They don't succeed. But that doesn't mean we don't have to go through all the work of fighting for our survival of our humanity. But he just assures us it doesn't work. They can't do it. They can't get at our core that way. Of course, today it's much more scary because we actually see people becoming robots. We see children just staring into the screen and developing no emotional life, no core sense of core.
Well, they've worked a damn good way of doing it. It does seem to be in progress. It's happening. We're getting warnings about this in the newspapers. War bots was in a recent headline here in the Daily Star, and the United Nations 116 scientists. Many of those scientists at the United Nations trying to stop this are actually got companies doing it. Elon Musk, many others, Google, all that.
Right.
So we are in an alarming stage, and just at the TCCHE conference here, professors, doctors Hurtak and Hurtak mentioned all this in London, and there was a morning television program on ITV which actually had a robot in it, and they were talking to the presenters on live television, and the robot outwitted them. Right down to the subtleties of humor in the way it spoke.
I love being a human being so much, and I know saying that it sounds weird, strange, but I just love humanity. I love being a human being. When I was studying music and I was playing the flute and I was meditating and I was understanding how sound, melds with my physical being, and how it affects others, and how you can develop talents, and you can develop relationships, and you can interact with the world, and gardening, and I love being a human. I love this earth so much, and I think a lot of us just feel that way, and we don't understand why would anyone want to develop machines that you can put into your brain to give you something. Why don't you find ways to develop that out of your core self?
They're not here. They're not human. They're not from here. Neither are we, but we have a predator.
Right. So you can go in that direction, and I of course understand what you're saying, but I'm kind of talking to young people who are thinking of, oh, how cool, one day we'll be able to have implants and we'll be able to have all this stuff, and not realizing that they're being given a paradigm that, as you would say, potentially, and I would agree with you, will robotize them and deprive them of the beautiful experience of being a human being. So,
we've had our genetics messed with to reduce our telepathic and remote viewing abilities and other sentient higher realities, some people would call dimensions. We're going to be locked into 3D in a computer.
You don't even have to have your genetics fussed with for that. So having explored and, having done the Roseway meditation, which I expressed in the last time, and having had, years of intense meditative experience, I find that if I just am working with the computer a lot, which I do as a writer, I shut down my abilities. I have to really work consciously to keep them going, and my sensitivities and my heart, my core self is like, I have to, okay. And in a sense, I'm almost happy for the illnesses because they bring me into my bodies. They make me work with myself and energetically, etc. So what am I getting at? What do I really want to share about that? I want to say that even without the genetic interference that you're implying with the alien abduction and so forth, and the multi-generational interference that people talk about. Even without that, even without the MK Ultra, just having the world that we have today shuts people down. Yeah, and the GMOs and the bad food and the drugs and the pharma and
have you heard of 2045? Those scientists, Russian scientists, global scientists, making it into an avatar, having a human avatar, actually officially. I mean, it's on their website. 2045. Get rid of the human body, then
just go
get rid of the human
cyberspace.
brain. But then they make the mistake that the brain is the center of consciousness, and that's where it all happens.
Right.
So their basic assumptions have got an error.
Right.
Which is possibly.
I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I understand what you're saying. Right. So there's all these, and it's fashion and it's marketing. I mean, if you can get a bunch of older people to freeze themselves and say, okay, when you're ready with this, put me into your computer and I'll become an avatar and I'll continue to live in this other world, which I believe was one of the Doctor Who episodes, actually.
Doctor Who has got a great deal of stuff in it. The Daleks. Yeah. The Daleks are the earliest version. The most. This is 1963. And also the black goo, I'll say that, in Quatermass, 1956. BBC.
And the black goo in the earliest Star Trek.
Yes. The Falklands War stuff. 400 crates of this stuff taken by Britain from the islands south of Falkland War to Britain, to England. It's a lot of.
So let's just talk about.
It's a lot of black goo there.
Yeah. Let's just talk about for a second all the people who've been targeted and killed. So you have who was the company that was associated with the black goo? It starts with an M. Do you remember that in England?
Marconi.
The Marconi, and so a lot of their scientists died.
I think it was 48. I've actually spoken, and he's extremely ill at this very moment in time. He's having all sorts of things. He's actually in America right now as we speak, and he stood on 400 crates of black goo, 2 meters long, 2 meters wide at the widest point, all interlocking. If you could imagine huge tanks or crates which interlock like a zip, like the teeth on a zip, and there's 400 of these things frozen at minus 20 degrees Celsius on Thule Island. He stood on those crates as they were shipped into the ship to bring them back to this country. And afterwards he blew the place up so nobody else could go in there. He was in the explosives export, and he's sat in this room where I am now. And he's very, very ill. So we are in trouble, girl. Continue. Happy days. Let's get a solution to this problem.
Yes, Marconi. And then, I'm talking about these things because I know that people will be watching this who don't usually watch your channel because they'll follow my name here.
Also, I'll butt in again, also from a civilian point of view, they used laboratories, I think, in Nottingham, the Boots company. They were using it for civilian purposes. And the point about this stuff is it really loves intelligent form. It loves complicated form. And it's intrinsic in crude oil. There's a sentient fluid, it's called, and we have our sentient fluid. And I think Nassim Haramein has gone into a little bit of this, why it mathematically happens with the very function of how matter is created and how life and energy works through the crystallized form of energy, which we call matter. But so the stuff that's landed here is mathematically incompatible to our life here. That's why it's got a lower consciousness rating, and would otherwise be called psychopathic, because it just has a consciousness which says eat, live, eat, kill, eat. It doesn't have a higher functions. So when you then create people, or it affects people, their higher consciousness levels collapse. Ergo, the Doctor Who Dalek, 1963. In a very crude robot, the BBC chose to convey this, but that's the basic message: a pathological creature made during wars by humans on a planet which came across the universe. It's also in, I think, the latest movie, Guardians of the Universe. I think it's in that one as well. There's a device, a seed, which goes into each planet and then will take control of that on a consciousness level. And I have to ask you, so I can shut up, is your computer talking to you at a consciousness level? Have you find it's engaging in your consciousness when you work with it?
I don't know what you mean.
Do you find that the computer seems to know what you're doing?
Oh, I think when you start paying attention to things like that, you realize it's kind of everywhere. Your life is just molding itself to you in different ways. You look at the clock; it's always 11:11, or it's always.
Yeah.
It's like the Matrix saying to you, "Hi." Hi, you're in a matrix. Yes, I know. I'll have a thought and I'll hear that word on the radio that I'm thinking just at the same moment, or I'll see it on the computer, or, and I'll receive. So yeah, definitely. I would say the world, I would say once you're aware of it, the world is interacting with you. The matrix is interacting. This is kind of fun, actually. I mean, I don't mind it. What I did realize, though, this is a different thing, is when I was sick, and I would watch shows sometimes that had commercials. Those commercials, they are so down-pulling. They emit so much. I can't just thinking about commercials just sends
Well, I know
chills down
somebody again who in London was over here studying all that, and he says they use black magic in the commercials. They say it is a magically programmed medium.
Right.
It is.
The sound, the pulsing of the vibrations,
yes,
the sound, the way that flashing. Yeah, I would like be watching something, and then the commercials would come, and it was like an explosion of negativity into my space. And I just think, oh wow, people are watching this all the time. It's just incredible and unbelievable.
And the broadcasting authorities know only too well they are guilty as hell.
Right. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. So my father was in television, I mentioned. And his name is Sava Jacobson, Sava Jacobson. And you can find stuff about him online. And he was involved in the development of color television. Anyway, he used to tell me when I was watching television, don't be so close to the television. And he would say, don't believe what you see on television, and those, they're lying. They're lying to you. And he thought it was a travesty, television. He thought it was going to stop people from having a life, from thinking for themselves, from reading. He thought it was a travesty for literature. Anyway, just throwing that in there.
Well, in South Africa, they didn't have TV for a long time because of that very issue. And having worked in television all my life, I agree with you. I've seen things happening which are horrendous, but don't let's go there. This is about you and your work.
Well, I just wanted to point out that there was this there's been this systematic killing off of people. During the 2000s, it was the people, the biochemists, like one after another, biochemists who maybe had worked on chemical warfare, for the government.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the people who built the pyramids, right, in Egypt or something like that, and then they were locked in them. They were killed because you're not supposed to. You die with if you produce something for the elites, you're supposed to die with what you know. So then it was the biochemists, and then it was the bankers. There was all the banker deaths in the late 2000, 8 to 10 to 12.
And now a lot of holistic doctors
and now it's the doctors. I think it's over 60 now. Holistic doctors who have been murdered or died under mysterious circumstances. Very important doctors who were working in autism and for cancer. There was also a plane that crashed. I don't remember exactly where it was, over the Caucasian somewhere, which was full of doctors who were studying AIDS. Like 200 doctors of one flash were gone. And
when was that?
Um, I'm going to say 2012,
Oh,
2013.
really quite recently, because I mean, AIDS
Really
is an
quite
old.
recently.
It's
Yeah.
another one of those man-made diseases, which
Right.
was outed way back in the 1990s.
Right. Absolutely. And the frightening thing is when you actually have the time and you take the time to look at, and I have to say that, everybody says in my world, oh, those conspiracy theorists, etc., those horrible people. But when you start to look at what they've done and you realize that time involved, the energy, the sophistication, the high intelligence, people who have devoted their lives to uncovering and documenting certain things, it's like, in gratitude, I fall down before you and I watch your stuff just to watch it. And I believe it's the duty of any American citizen to watch the truther movement of 9/11 once a year, look at what has been discovered, look at what people are talking about. And the same thing with these diseases. Look at it, look at what's happening. People don't take the time to go down these rabbit holes. They should, because the people who are researching them are excellent.
I mean, right now we've got a lot of hurricanes moving on its way to 3 hurricanes on their way to the United States.
Right.
Man-made, warned about, man-modified scalar weather warfare, square clouds. I mean, how many times you have to see square clouds to know that something odd's working? And that's a strategic bowling alley attack on the United States warfare.
When you watch Judy Wood's work on
Yes.
9/11, you know that anything is possible.
Yeah,
and we would
that's scalar energetics. And one of the reasons why a British soldier called John Irwin went public was because once they saw that, they knew that they got access to what we now call pre-flood man technology. So why? I mean, some would call it Atlantean, but that's pre-flood man technology. I think a very descriptive phrase. But we're getting heavy here, but we need to.
Yes, we've gone real heavy. We've gone real fast, real heavy.
Yeah. So do you want to continue on and we'll I've got another one on the runway in about another 25 minutes, so I think we've only got another 25 minutes max.
Oh, I don't know if it's necessary to go on right now.
Yeah.
I would like to say one of the last things that really woke me up, and it's something that everybody should remember, was the 2010 swine flu vaccine.
Yeah.
And I was actually working, I remember in 2009 when the news came, I think it was in February, that a worker in a lab in I don't know, Czech or a Slavic worker in a lab there had just taken it upon himself, before sending out the tons of material that was going to be sent out to all the labs around Europe to make into the immunizations that would then put in the arms of the people, right? Before sending it out, he thought, oh, I'll just give this stuff to some lab animals. And he did, and they all got terribly sick. And then he realized that in that material there was a combination of a live virus of the bird flu and a live virus of the swine flu. So you put those live viruses together, you send them out into the world, and they will recombine in the human body, and they will form something that then becomes the next flu epidemic. And anyway, he stopped that from happening. But there was this woman, Burgermeister, I think it was her name.
Yes, I think she ended up going to jail, and the late Dr. Rowney killed her. I filmed a recording with her, and a little clip of that where she warned about this thing was banned on YouTube. It's still banned today, although the full-length interview isn't banned. But that, I got one of my biggest negative strikes. I would almost have lost my channel in January 2011 because the European Union were going to debate why are we being ripped off on all this. So
Jane Burgermeister, she actually sued the World Health Organization and the United States and the Baxter, it was, who did this. She sued them because she was a medical journalist, and she said that could not possibly have been accidental because the safety regulations on that level of production of vaccine substance are so high that it just couldn't happen. It was impossible that wasn't intentional. So she sued them. And the same year, The epidemic laws went into effect on the level of the World Health Organization. So they basically dictated that if there's an epidemic, they have the right to enforce vaccination. So let's say that that epidemic had broken out because the vaccine had been put into the arms of the people, right? So now there's an epidemic. Now they can force everyone to take the vaccine, and so it came. So in other words, the same year that that law went into effect, there was the vaccine. And you took away the vaccine because that wonderful person, I guess he got an inside tip in that lab. He gave it to the lab animals. So you take away the vaccine, and now you just have the laws. You have everybody pressing everyone to buy that vaccine, and you had all the irregularities. It's given to women who are pregnant. It's given to, it's treated as though there's this worldwide epidemic, but actually what was going on was they were no longer testing, do the people actually have the swine flu? They were just saying all the flu was the swine flu, but actually when they tested it, it wasn't. So I'll just quickly finish here. The only government that refused to go along with the swine flu vaccine and to buy it and so forth was the Polish government. And you remember that they were taken out in that plane that crashed.
And Michael Shrimpton has detailed how that was done by a secret German intelligence agency who run America and the British Cabinet Office and a whole lot of other places.
So if I die, it's not suicide. I'm not suicidal.
Well, we're not going to have any of that talk here. You're going to be just fine. And thank you very much. This is very serious stuff. You have tremendous courage. And it's a pleasure we've got to somehow get this out to a much bigger, wider audience. For now, thank you so much, Hilary.
Thank you. Okay.
Bless you.
Bye-bye, guys. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.